right, so let me restart. So before we begin our event, we want to quickly acknowledge the land that some of us are zooming from today. And I'm currently in UC Santa Cruz. So the land on which we gather is the unceded territory of the Awaswas speaking Upi tribe, the Amamutsin tribal band, which is comprised of the descendants of indigenous people taken to Mission Santa Cruz and San Juan Bautista during Spanish colonization of the Central Coast, which is today working hard to restore traditional stewardship practices on these lands and heal from historical trauma.
Thank you, Alejandro. So yes, we are very excited for everybody joining us. We're going to go ahead and get started with our panel. My name is Alexis, and I'm a peer advisor for the psychology department. I am co-hosting this event with my fellow peer advisor, Alejandro. We're also joined by Professor Hannah Ryla, who helped facilitate this event. So thank you for joining us, Professor. This event is aimed to highlight a few different master's credential programs that can lead to various careers in clinical psychology. We have 3 panelists that are here to share their experiences attaining their degree and elaborating on the pathways to their current positions. We will start with a panel introduction and then go into some pre-planned questions that some of you guys gave us from the Google form that was sent out and our peer advisors. Then we'll open it up for some questions from the audience, and then we'll close with some resources that you guys can use. Without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Dr. Hannah Ryla to introduce our panelists.
All right, hello everyone. Good to see folks. So we have 3 wonderful panelists joining us today. We've got Anastasia Alexandrovskaya. She is a licensed marriage and family therapist and LMFT with her undergraduate degree from UC Santa Cruz, who went on to get a master's in counseling psychology. So for the last 2.5 years, she's provided therapeutic services and service coordination with CAPS, as well as student health. We're also joined by Caroline Morton. Caroline is also a licensed marriage and family therapist and LMFT with a master's in counseling psychology. She provides psychotherapy through her private practice and is also the program director and clinical supervisor for the School Linked Services Wellness Program with the Cabrillo Unified School District. And then we've got Amelia Cutton. Amelia is a licensed clinical social worker and LCSW who got her undergraduate degree from UC Santa Cruz in 2006 before going on to pursue a master's in social work or an MSW. For the past 2.5 years, she's been a case manager providing care coordination and therapeutic services, also with CAPS and student health. So let's welcome them all today. We're very happy to be joined by them. And peer advisors, go ahead and take it away.
Thank you so much for the introductions. We'll now go ahead and begin asking some of the questions that you guys sent out. So this first question is for everybody. The question is, how did you decide to pursue your current career path? We'll start with Anastasia, then Amelia, and then Caroline.
Thank you. So as mentioned, I was a UCSC undergrad, and when I was at the UC, I knew for sure that I wanted to study psychology. So I came in knowing that that's the field that I wanted to be in, but I wasn't exactly clear on what that would look like after graduation and whether I was going to try to become a psychologist or a therapist, or if I wanted to do research. And so when I was at the UC, I really just kind of did my courses and graduated. And then I had the experience of working with a foster agency as well as a residential group home for foster youth right after I graduated. And so when I was there, I realized that I love the work and I want to be able to provide counseling and therapy services, but I couldn't do that at the level that I wanted to with my undergraduate degree. I was a residential counselor, so I was able to provide some counseling to the residents there, but I didn't get to do that in-depth work that I really wanted to do. And I watched the therapist that we had contracted with come in and do that work and felt really motivated to be able to do that work as well. So after working there for about 1.5 years, I decided that I wanted to pursue getting my MFT. So I actually ended up leaving the group home and working with a different population as well to try to see what I wanted to focus on. And so I worked at at the time it was Santa Cruz Counseling Center, which is now Encompass, which is the biggest nonprofit here, and got a little bit more experience, and then started my master's in counseling program. And then the next question, I'll go into more of what the path looked like, but it really was getting a little bit of experience out in the field and seeing that the undergrad only kind of allowed me access to being able to work with people, and then to do the work that I wanted to do, I had to go back and get some additional education.
Hey everyone, thank you all for having me. So similarly to Anastasia, I came to UCSC as an undergraduate, and I actually did not really know what I wanted to do. I ended up majoring in American Studies and Education, and you know, at that time did not know I really wanted to pursue you know, therapy, social work, in my current role as a case manager. And it kind of came into that by accident, I like to say, because, you know, I was kind of bumbling along after graduation, doing some volunteer work here and there. And I ended up getting an internship at Juvenile Hall in San Francisco. And through that route, decided I did not want to work in juvenile hall and kind of the punitive side of things, and found an organization that I really liked, that worked closely with folks that were either incarcerated or on probation. And they worked, you know, on kind of the mental health like side of things. And so I ended up pursuing a job that way. And again, similarly to Anastasia, just, you know, kind of saw that this could be a path to like a longer career, and just was very open and asked folks like kind of what their experience had been. And through that, just decided social work felt like a good fit because of the broadness of what social work can do, and the services social workers can provide. And so that's kind of how I ended up here, and pursued, you know, my master's and then licensure.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me as well. So my path was a bit all over the place. My undergrad degrees actually has nothing to do with psychology. It was in studio art, painting and drawing. And soon after I graduated from my undergraduate program, I was actually working in with a video game company doing more like graphic design. But while I was working there, I just was not feeling very fulfilled. And so I started volunteering at a domestic violence shelter in San Francisco. And that's sort of when the spark just kind of hit me around working with people and sort of the relational aspect of the work that I was doing. And so that completely shifted my career path. And so then I started working for a domestic violence agency here in San Mateo County, and was working in the shelter, doing a lot of case management work. And one of my mentors there was an MFT and art therapist working in the children's program. And so a few years into working at the domestic violence shelter, I decided to go back to school and went to a graduate program where I got my master's in counseling psychology with an emphasis in art therapy. And so my background, I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist and also a board certified art therapist as well. So it was really just this lovely marriage between my undergrad and my master's level practice.
Thank you so much, everyone, for answering. I will now move on for the second question, which is, what did your pathway to your position look like? For example, was it internships, volunteer, or prior jobs? I understand some of this may have already been answered, and we'll keep the same order as Anastasia, Amelia, and Caroline for this as well.
So as I mentioned, right out of UCSC, I worked at a foster agency and then a group home. I actually made some amazing connections at the group home. It was really hard work. A lot of us talk about residential being kind of like you have to do it before, like you got to pay your dues in the field and do some residential work before you move on to other positions. So when I started my master's program, I did a program that did evening classes. So I would be in school from about 6 to 9. And so I was able to still work during the day. So I actually applied while I was working at Encompass, and I was able to keep my job there. And Encompass, like, as you will find out, like a lot of nonprofits, programs kind of come and go depending on funding. What the county has funding for that year is kind of the programs that are being funded. And a lot of times they close and other programs open up. So I actually worked at, I think, 4 or 5 different programs while I was under Encompass, which was actually pretty great for me because I feel like it gave me experience with a lot of different populations, which has made me more versatile in my work. But I think when I was an undergrad, before I applied, I was working for a program that worked with individuals that were on Social Security benefits due to a mental illness and were unable to work. And I did kind of ADL stuff, which is like daily living skills. So I would help them go grocery shopping and make sure that they were budgeting appropriately, and then do outings to create community for that population because a lot of them were very isolated. And so that was kind of what my first job at Encompass was. And then from there, while I was an undergrad, or when I was in my master's program, I did an internship which is called a practicum. When you're in your master's program, you do some practicum hours where you work somewhere and get supervision. I worked for the school district, and I worked at Alt-Ed schools in Santa Cruz, which, if you don't know, are alternative education schools. So there are a lot of students that were unable to be successful in regular school. And so they went to an Alt-Ed program. I worked at STAR, which is in like Midtown Santa Cruz. And so I did, counseling for the kids that went there, and it was a high school. And so I got some really great experience and great supervision there. And then I also worked with the homeless population while I was in Encompass, and it was dual diagnosis program. So for people that both had substance use issues as well as mental health concerns. And then my last place, I also did a program where I worked with people that were released from locked care. So whether that was jail or a locked facility for mental health reasons, because they were unable to take care of themselves because they were gravely disabled. And I worked with helping them transition into living in the community again. And then my last placement, which is probably my favorite besides working here at the UC, I worked with a program called Families Together, which was a differential response program for CPS. So basically, if families were reported to CPS, but there wasn't enough to remove the child, my program that I worked at was aimed at keeping families together. So I would get to work with both the children in doing some of the mental health work and then parenting with the adults. So I got PPP certified, which is a parenting program. And that was really amazing, being able to have access to both the parent and the child, because that's something that's usually pretty uncommon. When I was working at the schools, I had access to the child, but not the family. So you lack this ability to control the whole environment for a person when don't have access. So that program was really wonderful. And I worked there for most of the time that I got my hours after graduation. So for being an MFT, you have to get 3,000 supervised hours. You get some of them during practicum, but most of them after you graduate. And so I did most of my hours there, which was great because you have to have hours that are for family, that are for kids, that are for adults. And I was able to get all of my hours there because I was able to work with different populations, which was awesome. And then as soon as I got my license, I took my clinical exam and I was like, I'm going to apply for the UC. It was very full circle for me to work at the university. I'm an immigrant, and we moved here because my dad got a job at a university. And so for me to be able to somehow be part of the university system again was something that was like a big goal of mine. So that's how I got here 2.5 years ago. Thank you.
For me, so like I mentioned, when I graduated from UC Santa Cruz, I didn't really know where my career was going to lead me. And so I decided to volunteer with the Peace Corps. And so I did that for 2 years before coming back to the States. And that was really great. But when I came back, I still had this kind of open-ended, like not sure what I wanted to do, did a lot of kind of community organization, working in schools while I was abroad with the Peace Corps. And so when I came back, that's when I got the internship at Juvenile Hall in San Francisco, just to kind of try out kind of different roles of service. And like I mentioned, I decided that wasn't for me. I was kind of, I'd been working, I took a job there as well as the internship, working with like a probation officer there, and then found this other organization called Seneca Family of Agencies, which is a pretty large organization within particularly the Bay Area, but also California in general, and now out of state as well. And there I started kind of from the bottom up. I worked in residential care, and then I worked, they have also some lower level like group homes. And then while I was in my master's program, continued to kind of work there overnights. And then also while I was in my master's program, I knew I felt for myself, I couldn't do that without also working full time. And so I did a part-time master's program. And so I was going weekends and then working full time at Seneca during that. And then also did some internships while I was at in my master's program. So I also got experience. Seneca works with foster youth, particularly in a variety of settings. Like I said, I was in a residential setting at the beginning. But then when I was in internships, I worked with like the homeless population, doing kind of case management. I also worked in high schools in the Bay Area as well, providing therapy at the high school level. And yeah, and so I kind of continued that until, I just decided that I worked with Seneca for almost 10 years in a variety of different roles, including up until I got my license. And again, that's when I came to UC Santa Cruz. So that's kind of how I got here.
All right, so for me, I was working at a domestic violence agency when I went back to school for my graduate program. And so as Anastasia mentioned, we need to have go through a practicum program while we're in our master's program. And so I was lucky enough to be able to do that at the domestic violence agency where I was working and employed, which was really great to find a practicum that was paid. One advantage that I'm bilingual Spanish speaking, I'm Peruvian as well. And if you speak another language, it's very helpful in terms of just finding some pathways out there. So I graduated from my program, and then at that point I got a job at with San Mateo County with an outpatient psychiatric clinic in Daly City. So still getting my hours, but also employed full time. So really my whole entire career path, I've been in paid positions as an intern, which I feel very grateful for that, finding those jobs. So I worked at an outpatient psychiatric clinic, mostly with adults, survivors of a lot of the folks that I work with there had immigrated from Central America with long history of quite a bit of trauma. And it was really cool working there because I was working with a team, so a psychiatric nurse, a psychiatrist, and myself. I just learned a lot during that placement. And then from there, I moved on to working for an agency, family service agency, and I was providing therapy services to children and families that had an open case with CPS. So it was the same sort of situation as Anastasia, where instead of removing the child, it's providing family therapy and child therapy for the families. But that was through that was a nonprofit, and then the contract ended. So then at that point, I came to work at Cabrillo Unified School District, providing short-term counseling through K through 5, part-time job. At that point, I started having my family, and so I had small children, and so the flexibility of working part-time was really fit for me. And so I worked, I finally got licensed in 2007 while working at the Cabrillo Unified School District. And then I started my private practice 2 years later here in Half Moon Bay, part-time private practice, part-time working at Cabrillo Unified School District. And then a few years later, I proposed to the school to develop an internship program within the Cabrillo Unified School District. So now I'm clinical supervisor and program director of an internship program where we have students that are still in the master's program and also associates post-grad that are needing to get their hours. And we have a pretty nice stipend that we can offer, which is pretty awesome. And yeah, and I still have my private practice, which is great.
Thank you so much for all of your guys' answers. It's so nice to hear the variety. I know it's very helpful for students. We're going to go ahead and go to the next question. So for a student trying to decide between all the clinical career paths out there, what are some of the differences between an LMFT, LPCC, and an LCSW? And what do each of these career paths enable you to do? And these questions are for anybody who feels they want to answer.
I'll let Amelia speak to the LCSW piece, just since she is our representative. I can say between the LMFT and LPCC, the program that I went to, there was an opportunity it was a program geared for MFT, but if you took a couple of extra courses to meet the LPCC requirements, you could also do that. LMFTs are licensed per state. So every state has a governing board. We have the BBS that overlooks the LMFTs, basically meaning once I get licensed, I'm licensed in the state of California. And if I want to go work in another state, I have to look at what's required of that state, and but definitely take usually the clinical exam over again and potentially have other classes. Although California has a very high bar, so usually there's not extra classes that you would have to take because we have more than other states do. That is something to keep in mind. If you are wanting to work potentially in a different state later on, you would have to get licensed in that state as well. LPCC is a title that isn't as common in California, but it is more common on the East Coast and in other states, and it is easier to transfer. So if you were going to be working in different states, LPCC might be the route to go for you. It is a different exam, so you would basically take a couple of extra classes besides the classes for the required for the LMFT, and then you would take a separate law and ethics test, because after you graduate, you have to take a law and ethics test and then a clinical exam when you're done with all of your hours. And so that would be another test. So you would have to take you'd have to take different tests for the MFT versus LPCC.
Yeah, and I would say it's pretty similar for social work in terms of, the education level and then the licensing process. I think the hours are slightly different in terms of how many supervised hours you have to get before you can take the license, which I think it's like 32. Well, at least when I did it, it was 3,200. That was back in 2017, I think. I had to complete. And in terms of the roles in the past, I think there is a lot of overlap, and Anastasia and I are in the same role here at UC Santa Cruz, and we have two different kind of backgrounds in licensing, so there is a lot of overlap. And I think for me personally, what drew me to social work was that I felt there was like a broader range of areas and expertise, I guess, I could go into, in terms of I could work with a lot of different populations, a lot of different kind of roles within populations. So like I said, I came from a background in working with children in the foster care system, also working in juvenile justice, and I've done clinical roles where I'm providing direct services, therapy to individuals, and then I've also done, like, my current role as the case manager, which is a little bit a broader role in terms of I provide a lot of different both therapy, but then also kind of resources for the student population. So I think they're all kind of have overlaps, but yeah.
I don't really have anything to add. I
No,
think
for
you
sure.
covered it. Oh.
For sure. Thank you. Also, next question, also open to anyone. So what are your current roles and responsibilities in your position? And what are the most important skills that enable you to do them?
So I can jump in there, go first. So right now in my position, well, with this school district, I'm in a more administrative position now, where I'm coordinating and developing programs specifically geared towards mental health district-wide. And so I work with the special ed department and really bring in components of mental health support for students, for their families, and for staff and teachers as well. And I think that having the direct service experience myself, and having been a therapist and doing the direct service brings me a lot of skills in terms of knowing sort of like where to tap into and what support systems might be needed. And then with my private practice, I work with, I see couples, I see teens and families as well. I think one of the pieces also, just in terms of the LMFT, that I should have chimed in before, is that we do have a lot of training on doing family work. And that's sort of a big core component of an MFT. And so I think that was an area that was helpful in my training as well. And so in my private practice, I do a lot of trauma work, and I also have certified in brain spotting, which is a type of EMDR work as well. And so that's the piece that I do there.
I'll give a little brief interview to Amelia in I's position, but kind of focus on what's unique to mine in case Amelia wants to share more. But so the position that I'm in is a case management position that's split between the Student Health Center and CAPS. And the reason that I really was attracted to that position versus just applying for CAPS was that it's really broad. We get to see students and help them with resourcing, getting connected off campus, to whether that's like long-term therapy or even stuff for like physical health, making sure we can get them the right like referrals and where they need to go. We communicate with a bunch of different departments on campus to advocate for students. And my role specifically too is focused for international students. It's a new position that was created. So I'm kind of the first person in that role. And what's been really fun is kind of working with the different departments that work with international students and doing outreaches to increase utilization, because it is a population that underutilizes therapy services. So that's been a really fun part of the job, is like getting to plan these outreaches and trying to get more students to use the services and get to create kind of new ways of doing that, which has been really fun. And I really love the individual, like the therapy work. And unlike CAPS, which has to do like more brief therapy in order to see and serve as many students as possible, in my role, I'm able to do more long-term therapy with a student if that feels like it's a good fit and they're having a hard time connecting off campus. It's been really nice to hold a small caseload of students through, I've been here for 2.5 years and I've had a couple of students that I've been working with for that long. So the ability to work with somebody more long-term is really attractive to me, because it's something that I wasn't able to do in other programs. At the group home, someone ages out or they get a different placement, or in Families Together, we would work with people for a year. That's what the contract allowed us to do. So the ability to both do the low hanging fruit of like meeting with someone once and getting them connected and feeling like great, and then being able to do the more long-term work is something that I really appreciate. And what I would say about the most important skills, I honestly think that the thing that has helped me the most is really having boundaries for myself and being able to like care as much as I do, because I'm a very empathetic person, but be able to like have a line where I can go home and take care of myself. I was very burned out in the beginning of my career because I took it home, and I would go home and I would just like worry about everyone and think about all these things. And I luckily had a really great supervisor that constantly reminded me about how important it was to have these boundaries, and that it's not selfish to take care of yourself, and it's not selfish to leave it at home, and it's actually really important, and it benefits you and the population that you work with to be able to do that. So I think once I learned that, I believe that that's the most important skill that I have to like keep me going through working in a pandemic when everybody and myself are going through a lot of things. So I would say that's the skill I'm most grateful for learning.
And I'll just briefly jump in, since my role is similar with Anastasia's. The piece that I do differently is that I work with the out-of-state student population, which I also really like doing, because there are definitely nuances, just finding resources and support for students in different states. And it's been interesting again with the pandemic, because a lot of students went home during 2020, right? And so I was working with students that were trying to access therapy or different resources in different states. And so that required me, to kind of do some digging and find resources in different states. And I mean, a state is a big place, right? So that more specifically in specific cities or towns that people were living in. And so that can take just like a lot of coordination and time looking for those. And I really like doing that part of the work too, is finding something that, a student comes to me and says, this is what I'm looking for, and helping them kind of look for it themselves, but also, aligning with them and finding that with them has been really great in my work. And then just in terms of the skills as well, jump in on that is, in addition to the boundaries piece too, is just organization, because I feel like there can be multiple layers to working with a person, right? Because we're not just flat human beings, right? We have a lot of diverse needs, and the student population I have found is is that way, right? You come in with your whole selves as students, and so that comes with a lot of different needs. And so for myself, just being organized has been invaluable. I feel like I've learned to be more organized. It's not maybe a trait that has always come naturally to me. And so that's been really helpful and rewarding for me within the role as a case manager. And then just the self-care piece as well, kind of similar to that boundary piece is, I talk to students all the time, every day about, practicing self-care. And that's something that I know is really important for myself as well. Because if I come into a conversation, tired and worn down, I'm not going to be of use or help to anybody else. So that's been really important to me as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your guys' answer. We'll go ahead and move on to our final pre-planned question before we open it up to the audience. So if you were advising a student who's interested in applying for a master's program, such as a master's in social work, to pursue a clinical career, how would they best prepare themselves? And this is, again, open for anybody.
So my suggestion is to volunteer somewhere, and that's obviously you wouldn't be able to volunteer necessarily providing therapy, but at a shelter, at a facility that can give you some experience around case management, working with people, working with populations that you might be working with as a therapist, and kind of dipping your toes that way and see if that's an area that would be interested to you.
I think for me, talking to people, I remember somebody had given me advice when I came back from the Peace Corps and didn't know what to do, is like go on informational interviews and just like ask people about what their role is, what they do. And so like coming to this panel, I think is one of those ways, is like, is this something I want to explore? And asking questions and meeting people, because I know for me, I came into this career with not knowing that ahead of time. And it just, like I said, was kind of by accident that I ended up here. And, I feel so grateful for the connections I've made. And so you never know what opportunities there are. And so I think the more people you can kind of talk to and just be curious about what they do, the more kind of connections you can make, and doors kind of, open, or there's more possibility.
I agree with what both the other panelists said. And I want to add, if you haven't gotten therapy or been to therapy yet, like go do it. Because I think being able to experience what it's actually like in the room is really important too, to see if that's actually something that you want to pursue. I know as part of our program, they actually made us go, like they were like, okay, if this is something you're interested in doing, you should probably have some experience of what it feels like in the room. So I just highly recommend to kind of seek that out if you haven't yet.
Awesome. Thank you so much, you guys, for all of your answers. They've been incredibly helpful. We're going to go ahead and open it up to the audience now. There's two ways you guys can ask your questions. You can either direct message myself, or you can raise your hands and we will go ahead and call on you. We can go ahead and Nora, go ahead. You can ask your question.
Hi. So I had a few questions. And I was wondering, sorry, I'm trying to see the names, but I can't see the names, but it was for the person who worked at the juvenile place. And I was wondering why you decided that wasn't for you.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think I felt that I was looking for more a place to provide kind of, I guess, more self-advocation and resources and a more therapeutic approach. And I felt that the juvenile justice system, the way that I experienced it from that kind of inside, did not allow for that. And so I felt going a different way was better for me.
Thank you for that. And I was also wondering, you have an LCSW, and I was wondering why you decided to get that instead of the LPCC again. I don't know if you already mentioned that, but I was just wondering more on the difference, because I'm also interested in working in correctional facilities, but also other social fields. So I'm not really sure which one I should pursue.
Yeah, I think that again, I think there's a lot of overlap. And I think for social work for me, I felt like there was the ability to work with more diverse populations. And by populations, I just mean like whether that be age populations or just different types of facilities. Like you could work in corrections, you could work in, elderly care, you can work at a university, in private practice. There's a lot of different routes you could take. And so for me, that opened the door that I didn't feel like I had to be maybe, and I don't think it's as narrow with an LMFT or anything like that either, but I think there's just like a wider option, I felt.
Thank you. I just have one last question, then I'm done. Where did you get I was just wondering, where did you pursue your LCSW? Because I've been looking at tons of schools and I'm just not really sure.
Yeah, that's a good question, because I think we didn't get a chance to touch on that a lot. And I went to Cal State East Bay for my master's program, and it was a part-time program, and that was what drew me to it, because I was able to work full-time while I was doing it. It was a 3-year program, and I pretty much decided because it was the part-time program. But I think a lot of schools are incorporating that nowadays, especially I think with the pandemic. So
thank you.
Awesome. So we have a question in the chat, and this is open to anybody, but did anybody had to take the GRE, and how was that for you?
So I ended up going to a school that didn't require the GRE. So a lot of master's programs do not require it. If you do go to some like a UC that may have that they would require a GRE. But for most programs that I'm familiar with, and I have a lot of friends that went into LCSW or LMFT programs, we didn't have to do the GRE.
I did not have to take it either.
me neither.
That's great to hear. I'm pretty sure that helped out a lot of people right now. I'm going to go ahead and let Corbin go ahead and ask your question.
Hi there. My question was, since you all went to the UCSC and went through the quarter system, I was just wondering how hard the master's program was compared to that, and if one could do a full-time master's program and then work on the weekends part-time, and if that's like a doable thing.
I think I'll jump in first if anyone else wants to answer as well, but I did a full-time program for my master's in counseling psychology, and that was like a 2-year, 3-month program. And I worked the whole time. For me, it felt accessible because you're doing something you're really interested in at this point. There isn't this like general education stuff that's like hard to motivate. It all felt incredibly like relevant and interesting, which I think kept me really motivated. So I found it, most people in my program worked because we did do like the evening classes. Like I said, our classes were 6 to 9. So it was really geared towards people that worked. I think pretty much it was a cohort of, I think 14 people, and I think all of us worked. So I think it is feasible. But I also want to say that people learn in different ways. I'm able to absorb information like pretty quickly. That's not necessarily the case for everybody. So I think it is pretty individual. I have one of my best friends did her LCSW program in Santa Clara, and she took time off to focus because school was something that she had to work at a little bit harder. So I think it's just kind of, it is individual. I found it to be manageable. I worked part-time when I was at UCSC. I hated the quarter system. That was really hard because it's very easy to get behind, but I was able to get away with working part-time. So that gives you like a sense of how my learning works.
Yeah, in my program, my graduate program, and also catered to full-time people working full-time. And so I completed it in 3 years. And during that time, I was working full-time and going to school. And it was definitely manageable. The classes were in the evening, sometimes on the weekends. And I was able to do my practicum at my place of employment. So that made it even better.
Sweet. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Awesome. And so we have a question in the chat for anybody. And when would be the best time to start volunteering and getting involved?
For me, I would say, I mean, as soon as you have the time and ability to. I don't think, I think you never know what may be, what will take you, where it will take you up, and so I think anytime you have the opportunity is a good time.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And also a lot of these volunteer programs include training, which can be really helpful. And so when I started volunteering at the Domestic Violence Agency, I was required to go through a 50-hour training program. And so that gave me some sort of foundational knowledge that was really helpful in terms of my next step.
And I'll take this as an opportunity to put a plug in for Haven of Hope, because that was kind of my experience. But they're always taking volunteers from UCSC, and I know right now they're actually really needing people. So if you're interested, you can look up havenofhope.org. They have several group homes in the county, and they're always taking volunteers. And it's a pretty natural progression for people to go from like volunteers to staff. You have to have your bachelor's to be staff, but it's pretty natural to kind of go into that. So if you're interested in getting that experience, I recommend to start now.
Awesome, thank you. Sammy, go ahead and ask your question.
Hi, yeah, I was specifically interested in working with teens, and I noticed that most of you have the LMFT license, and I was wondering, and I know you also work with CAPS, do you need the marriage and family therapist license like in order to work with teens, or how does that work?
So LMFTs and LCSWs and LPCCs can work with teens. And so that I think that's a little bit of a misnomer with the MFT license, the marriage and family therapist. I work with couples, I work with families, but I also work with teens and young children as well.
Yeah, and I would also say that you don't necessarily, depending on the kind of work you want to do, you don't necessarily have to get licensed even to pursue work with teens. So I think it just depends the type of work. So if you wanted to do more clinical work and therapy, then licensure would be helpful and needed. But if you wanted to try it out and volunteer, you could do it that way, or even with a bachelor's.
Awesome.
Okay. Oh, sorry, I had another question.
Oh, go for it.
Okay, and then I also thank you, and I also heard you guys talk about the clinical exam, and I was wondering like what it is and when you take it, and if it's a part of the degree program, or do you take it after you're done graduating?
So the exam is after for MFTs, you have to accrue 3,000 hours of internship that includes direct service, but also some administrative like paperwork and things like that. Trainings can be included in that, but the big chunk is direct service with children and adults. Requirement working with children, you definitely have to have that experience as part of your hours. Once you have all of your hours, and you have to have a clinical supervisor that signs off your hours, and You submit it all to the BBS, the Board of Behavioral Sciences, and then after that, you can sit for the exam to get licensed. So it's usually not for a couple years after you graduate from a master's program.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
And just about the test itself, 10 out of 10 would recommend buying one of the practice programs that they do. The test is very particular in the way that it words things. So a lot of people that don't do the practice test might not pass the first time because it is very specific, and the programs will teach you how to take the test. So just definitely recommend that. It is kind of intimidating if you don't go through that, but you usually tell you to study for like 3 months and really focus on the material before you go in it. And yeah.
Thank you.
Maribel, you can go ahead and ask your question.
Hi guys. So my question is kind of like there hasn't been a lot of talk of like the financial aspect. More specifically, I guess like in the master's program, maybe like is there financial aid or did you guys have to take out loans and stuff? Yeah, because I mean, I guess in undergrad it's pretty straightforward. Just like do the FAFSA, you'll either get loans or financial aid. I don't know if the master's programs are similar.
Yeah, so I went to a private university, and I did take out loans, and I think in retrospect, the reason why I went to this particular school, University de Namur in Belmont, is because it had the art therapy piece component to it, which I was really drawn towards. But in retrospect, I sort of financially, it probably would have been better for me to go to a state school like San Francisco State, and it would have been a lot more affordable.
Yeah, I would say same. I took out loans, and just kind of on that note in terms of the school and choosing schools too. And this is just my personal opinion, but it's been very rare that I've been asked about where I've gone to school or anything like that. And so I know there can be a tendency to look for a school, like a prestigious school or a school. But I think when looking for schools, I think just the values of the school, the values of the program, the quality of the like the internships and practicums, for me, felt more relevant and important than like the name of the school, if that makes sense. So I know that was a little tangent, but I just wanted to throw that in there.
I agree 100%. And I graduated from my program eons ago. So it's been a long time since I graduated. And definitely when I'm working with the interns that come to the program that I supervise, what's most important is the experience, the hands-on experience, as opposed to the theoretical experience that they're getting from the school.
Okay, and then I just had a follow-up on that. I was just hoping if you guys could expand a little bit on like the practicums and kind of what that entails. Like, is that through the school, or is that like you have to find something and then get it approved by the school? And then if you guys could expand a little bit more on the 3,000 hours, is that just like unrelated to the school and you kind of have to figure it out? Or is that like the school helps kind of in that journey, like after graduating?
Sure, I can hop in on that one. So usually, or at least in my experience, the first year of the master's program was a lot of education. Like you learn how to do therapy with different populations, you learn different approaches, you learn about multicultural stuff, you know, depending on what kind of program you have, if it's holistic, you learn about some of more of the holistic programs. And then in the second year, you're expected to start practicing somewhere in the community. So usually the school will host like a job fair type thing where different agencies that have a practicum placement basically set up will come and talk about it. But it is on you to like follow through with them and get connected. At least in my program, it was, and most of them are unpaid. So the sweet spot, as like Caroline mentioned, is if you're already working somewhere in the community and they have a program, they have someone that can provide supervision. And what supervision means basically in a practicum, for every 10 hours that you spend individually with a person, or maybe it's 5 in practicum, for every so many hours that you spend individually with a person, you have to get a unit of supervision, which is an hour with a licensed person who has done a couple of steps to become a supervisor, has taken some classes, and is up to date on everything. And they kind of walk through what you're doing with the clients, make sure that you're, practicing appropriately. They'll give you some suggestions if you have some concerns. They're also someone you can go to at any point. So when you're, if you get stuck on something, you can always go to that supervisor. So for my practicum, I mentioned I did it with the schools. Unfortunately, that was not a paid practicum. So that is something to consider. Some places do stipends. I know like Hospice of Santa Cruz does a stipend that will help. And so there's a limit on how many hours, there's so many hours that you have to get in practicum. And for MFT, those count towards your 3,000 hours. So the hours that you get in your practicum will count towards that total 3,000. Once you graduate, it's kind of completely on your own. You want to find a job, hopefully that is paid, which my job was paid, where they take interns, which means you're an associate, you're an MFTA, American Family Therapy Associate, where you can continue to get those hours because you still need that supervision. So my biggest thing to say is like to make sure to find a place that has an established practicum program, because I have heard some stories of people being like, oh, like I really want to work here, and so I went, but then they were having issues getting the supervision that they needed. So best to go with a program that has like a really well-defined, established practicum program.
Thank you.
Perfect. I'm so sorry. Unfortunately, we have reached our time to wrap this event up, but we want to thank our panelists again for taking the time to share their knowledge with us, and to Hannah Rayla for helping make this event happen and possible. We will be passing our panelists' websites along with their LinkedIns in the chat as well. We already put their website, emails, pardon me. There we go. It's already being done as I speak. So if this panel piqued your interest, we have additional events regarding graduate school posted on our website, which we are also pasting in the chat. And thank you all for your time, and hopefully you all got some answers that you were all looking for. If you have any additional questions for the peer advisors, we will stay on for a couple of minutes. And if not, have a great evening.
Thank you,
everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all again for hosting.